Well, hello everyone. My name is Juan Manuel Dominguez. I'm part of the Spam Arts team, and it's my beautiful pleasure to be here at Electronic November talking with Kristen Radtke. Kristen, I wanted to introduce you, but first I'm gonna let you say hi because I know it's an awkward moment when you are quiet waiting for the other person to stop talking. So you can say hi to our audience.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. Wish that I
Kristen,
could be there in person instead of in a very rainy New
oh,
York.
we wish that too. Kristen Radtke is a fantastic person. I don't know him as a human, her as a human being, but she does a wonderful work. She has been doing it for many years now. She's now the art editor of The Believer, but she's also a graphic novelist. She's also a writer. You have been an editor in many places. You have written for places like, I don't know, GQ, New York Times, New Yorker. You have a fantastic graphic memoir called Imagine Wanting Only This. And
Thanks.
you have already two books in the oven, to put it in a manner of speaking.
Yeah.
So you are quite familiarized with the world of journalism, visual art,
hmm
and especially when it comes to telling a story visually. I do believe in, and we're talking about comic books, of course.
hmm
So, did I get anything wrong?
No, everything. I mean, it's very generous. It's a very generous interpretation of my career. So thank you.
So far so good. So the thing what I'm bothering you while you are at your work and you have been so nice to us has to do with comics, and has to do with comics that you guys are doing at this wonderful magazine that I have here on my hand, which is called The Believer. I'm going to bother you with a one-on-one explanation of what The Believer is for people that maybe don't know what The Believer is.
Definitely. So The Believer is an arts and culture magazine. It's published out of the Beverly Rogers Black Mountain Institute in Las Vegas, at the University of Las Vegas. And we publish essays, journalism, interviews, and a big comic section and poetry. And the comic section has really grown throughout the years. And that's been, I think, for me, one of the really exciting parts about working for an arts and culture magazine is that not many publications get to make space for comics like that.
Uh, and I want to ask you, well, The Believer has always been since the days of Dave Eggers, to tell it in a
Mm-hmm.
way, has been always a very radical magazine when it comes to taking design, taking templates, and taking
Yeah.
different ways of approaching, talking about arts and showing
Mm-hmm.
arts. So I was quite not surprised, but very happy when I checked what you guys been doing with your comics digitally. Comics were always a big part of The Believer.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I
Mm-hmm.
want to point out. I mean, publishing comics in The Believer has always been something. It's not a trend that they get into.
Right.
It's not like I don't know, New York Times doing comics. They always have fantastic artists. They have Tony Millionaire has always been on a
Yeah.
set of the magazine doing portraits, and you have names there like Gilbert Hernandez, Simon Halseman, Tommy Parrish, Jason Lutz, like very popular names in the comic world right now.
Yeah.
Very Eisner Award winning artists, except for
Yeah.
Tony, but we love him anyhow. But so comics have always been crucial to you guys. But
Mhm.
there's this thing going on, and that's the thing I want to talk to you about. About you have two comics that you have published in the last few, I want to say, weeks, months,
Yep.
that have been way different from anything that I've seen before, without trying to be too radical. Can you talk a little bit about what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so The Believer, like you said, very eloquently, has always had a great space for comics. I think where we have worked and put some attention lately is how can we translate a comic that appears in a print magazine into something that's really exciting to read on the internet and read on the web, whether it's on your phone or your computer or wherever. So we've just been working on that for about a year now, looking for ways in which comics can maybe move, like literally move a little bit. And I don't always mean animation, although sometimes I do. But even if a piece is still including just still images and still panels, like how can that experience be a little bit more interactive or a little more dynamic for a reader on the internet?
And I want to ask you, since what people, of course, are going to be able to check as soon as this talk is over, what we're talking about. We're talking about, especially the vine and the fish.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember right now the name of the other story, but you can help me with that.
Yeah, there's another piece called Expiration Date by Jonathan Hill, which just went up, which is about kidney transplants and the future of kidney transplants.
Yeah, and these two comics work in a way that I have never seen a comic book work before. But before going into that again, I want to ask you, what's your relationship with digital comics, and what things do you guys check out the list when you were saying we want to do digital comics? We want to stop translating the page into the screen, be it a mobile screen, be it a tablet screen, be it a computer screen, and create something that has a life of its own. And it has a personality when you scroll, it has a personality when you're moving with your pad on the screen. So how was that do and don't list that you guys created in order to move forward?
Well, I think it started with like kind of a disappointment that I felt as a comics editor and as a graphic artist myself, of that the pieces that we made for the magazine just didn't look as good on the internet. Like the engagement wasn't as high, you know, like it's if you publish like a full page, you know, 3 panels, like a classic comic sort of structure, like 3 panels across, 3 panels down on a page, and you put that on the internet. Maybe you can read that fine on your desktop, but then on your phone, it's like really tiny and you're scrolling and moving, you know, it's just like not right. But there are so many challenges, I think, with translating those things, because artists are making something for a page. So if you have something like a 2-page spread or something in a magazine, it's like, how do you translate that scale to the internet in a way that's just as exciting as turning a page and seeing like something really huge and dynamic on the page? So I think it started for me, like I was just trying to figure out something new. And then I ran into the art of this artist named Matt Hunn, he's an Australian comics artist, lives in New York now. And he did a piece for us he did a piece that was sort of like an interactive comic called The Boat. And he did that quite some time ago, not quite 10 years ago, but maybe like 7, 8 years, something like that. And when we were working on our Borders issue in 2019, I posted that I was looking for comics that explored the idea of borders in any broad way. And we started talking, and then we found a way to work on an interactive comic together for The Believer. And that was the first piece that piece went on to be like a finalist for a Webby, a finalist for 2 National Magazine Awards, longlisted for the Communication Arts Awards. And it was so exciting to see people reacting to it, like even people who weren't traditional comics readers. So that was sort of like the prototype for what we designed. And then from there, I was trying to figure out a way to make it like more affordable, more accessible, so we could continue to do it rather than just like one big piece a year. How can we do this, you know, every issue?
Because one of the things that people can see, I do believe this, when they see the comic, is how you talk about the physicality of moving the page, which is extremely important. You know, you have this always told around story about Neil Gaiman having to add a page to a paperback to have an impact page work, you know. And that's, I'm going to say it's stupid, but I don't want to be aggressive. I think the approach we usually have had to digital comics has to do with using the screen as a window.
Right.
And never the screen as a parallel to the physicality of moving a page.
Right, right.
What I do think that is fantastic is that you guys, of course, there are many artists working on this. Of course, there are many artists, gazillions of them. But what I think is amazing that you guys actually, at least for me, at least for my eyes, at least for my experience, you guys discovered this sort of idea that the physicality of comic is extremely important. And we have been always talking about the eyes in the comics. We have been talking about how everything is connected in the same space, how every panel has a relationship with every panel, how you see everything at the same time. And what I do think that without breaking that, you guys have managed to say, well, yes, but no.
Yeah, thanks. That's really nice. That's really nice to hear.
So I want to ask you how you guys work actually this physicality. And for people who haven't read it, it's a little bit hard to explain, but I'm gonna leave that to you. So
Sure.
you're
Well, I
traveling.
mean, I can talk about the Vine and the Fish, the one you talked about by Lise Hook. So um, Lise got in touch with me with this idea for a comic about the xenophobia of naming of invasive species. This was right at the beginning of when coronavirus was just starting. Our president, Donald Trump, was calling it the Chinese virus. And, you know, it was like very xenophobic, very racist. And this woman, this artist, Lise Hook, got in touch with me under that realm to say, hey, I've been thinking about this for a long time. You know, like I'm an immigrant, and I have often felt frustrated by the way in which invasive species like plants and fish and things like that are sort of named after the place they come from in a sort of derogatory way. And so it's kind of an investigation of that. And the piece isn't about coronavirus or Trump at all. Like, it's not even mentioned explicitly. It's just sort of like the lens through which you can read it because it's going on still. And so she was this great artist. She's this great artist, and I loved her art. And as soon as I looked at it, there's like this one big, beautiful drawing of fish, and it's kind of like this teal green. And I was like, I would love to see this move. You know, so I called her and I said, have you ever done animation? And she was like, not really. But we just figured it out. So basically what happens is, you know, she made a print version and then we worked on an animated version together. And so we had to get the print version done first because we go to press, you know, sooner. It takes months to print. So we go and we get that done. And then what she did is she made like a couple of versions of each panel. So like the fish, you know, the 3 different versions of the fish so that the fins move a little bit and like the water bubbles. And then I just worked on animating them and another big thing we did was that we separated the text from the panel so that when we scroll, sometimes the text maybe is scrolling over the top of an image rather than remaining like stuck to it.
Yeah. What I want to add there is for the people who haven't seen the comic, but feel different about it, because one of the things that people try to immediately add to comics when we had the chance to see comics online was sound. Like, we like
Right.
sound is the one thing that we don't have. Sound is our kryptonite. So what happened there was that adding sound wasn't quite working for us. It was actually making us like taking our head in a places that our head shouldn't have been.
Right.
And what's beautiful about what you guys do, I do think, because and also how the idea of movement in vignettes have been something that's been around for a lot. But what I do think you guys add is the idea that movement inside the vignette is just as important as the next vignette. It says something about the same vignette. It makes you rethink about what the frame you're looking at. So again, I have never seen something like this before. The idea of not exploring the world, not saying like, hey, this comic can be infinite. We can go all the way here and all the way up and move around. But saying we can include moments to give meaning to storytelling and not only to show what we can do as a technique or a media.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And I think one of the things I like about that movement is it also signals when you should take a breath and just look at something for a little while longer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course, because that was what I was trying to get to. It actually gives you a sense of what the space does in the page. And
Absolutely.
now you're doing it with time, which is absolutely wonderful. We have never seen that in comics. So it's really great. You're using time in the same way spatial time goes around in a page. So that's truly fantastic. And I want to ask you, you told me about the process, but I want to ask you a little bit more about the process. Because it seems to me, not knowing what it is a mix of, I'm going to say GIF, whatever you guys call it. It seems like a mix of GIF and a mix of vignettes, because of course there are solid classic vignettes there in pairs of 2. And there's also this beautiful idea that the legend, what the comic is saying, what defines the thinking of the comic, it moves around. Like a title in a movie, it moves around.
Right.
But when you scroll, you have right here, you can see the legend moving here, and it's something that gives, I should say, it gives you time. It lets you breathe. It lets you take in the pacing of the comic. So I want to ask you a little bit more about that, but I want to ask you under this light, which is this particular take. I do think has to do with the particular comic. It cannot be a general take on comics. So I want to ask you, under that light, how was that process of course, taking apart the original comic and seeing what resource you are going to use to tell the story digitally?
Well, it was, I think it's similar to when a comics artist is laying out a comic for the first time. Like, okay, if you storyboard a comic or something like that, you may think that there's this one scene, like the person going down the stairs to check the mail. Maybe that is just one panel, and you just write, okay, I'm going to make a note. I'm going to sketch that really quick. I'm going to come back to that. And then when you draw it, you're like, oh, I actually need like 3 panels to show that process. Maybe that's important to the story or something. And so I think it's similar to that, where when an artist is making choices about like what will be big, what will be small, what can we skip, like what don't we have to see. And I think that was what we did digitally too, is like trying to figure out what would be, when we had a full page, a sort of full screen spread versus like traditional panels and things like that. But the other big challenge was the technical limitations, like finding a way to make this that it wouldn't take 10 minutes to load on someone's phone or someone's computer. So that was a big challenge too, about getting the resolution high enough that it didn't look pixelated, but not so high that it would crash people's phones, stuff like that. So, and that was a really big challenge. So, I mean, fortunately, GIFs are really small. They're like, it's in that way, it's great. And then in some places we actually had to use video to loop them, because when there was like maybe 8 or 9 different animated frames, a GIF was just too big.
Wow, that's fantastic. You told me off the record, which is now on the record, that you are working a lot on this, maybe months. So I want to ask you even more about the process, because I'm very interested about the process, and to ask you if this is a one-time thing, or if this is something that you guys wanna really get into, that you really want to explore.
Yeah, I want to keep doing. I loved this. I mean, it was an extreme amount of work. It was not as much work for me as it was for the artist Lise Hook, who was drawing, hundreds and hundreds of hours for this project. But it was, it took months of my time at work, and in addition to other things, of course, it's not the only thing I was doing. But it was the thing that really like motivated me. I think it was the thing I was most excited to do every day at work. Was, okay, I'll animate a couple of panels, I'll lay them out on the web, I'll figure that out, work with my developers. I have really great web developers that helped create the template that we could use for this. So it was really time consuming. I think the challenge always at a small magazine, and really any place, but especially when you have limited resources in terms of money and staff, is like finding that equation and that balance of how can we find a way to fund this project, and how can we find a way for me to justify that time away from other projects. So that's really always the challenge, but I'm really dedicated to continuing. We'll do something like this every issue. They won't always be as elaborate as the Vine and the Fish in terms of the animation, but in terms of layout, we'll be doing at least one every issue.
Another thing that I wanted to talk about, it has to do with the layout, just like you said before, because I do think one thing that is fantastic is that it feels that any approach to digital comics is right. Like how you choose a market, for example, for indie comics. I'm gonna use a generic tag, but how you use a different market for generic comic, how you have a market for mainstream comics. Reading this comic, what I felt is like every comic should have this much people listening to what it has to tell digitally. It's not so much about the technique, it's a lot about hearing what the comic needs to be told in a proper way digitally. And I want to ask you, how do you feel about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's like why comics needs good editors. I mean, I think, there are a lot of really amazing comics editors of course, all across the world. But I think often, like in book publishers or in magazine publishers, we might have people editing who love comics, but maybe aren't super experienced editing comics. And then there's, sometimes comics writers don't get sort of that attention in the way that they should, because you really need someone who understands how this, like, comics is just another way of telling stories. Like an editor who understands how a paragraph works, you need an editor who understands how panels work and how those things build into, you know what I mean? So I think that it's really exciting when you have a collaboration between an experienced comics editor and a comics artist.
I'm completely, I hear you, but I do think comics that have been so battered down over the days, the decades, be a graphic novel, won an award, try to win a Pulitzer Award.
Yeah.
We all know the routine. But I do think comics become a fantastic landscape when it comes to trying to do new things online. I don't think cinema can do that. I don't think books can do that. I think comic, because of its nature, can really do that.
Yeah. I don't know. I like that idea. I think that there is, the internet gives us a lot of beautiful ways to tell stories. And I think that we can do that with, we see really amazing projects that use video and incorporate video into journalism and things like that. Like, I think multimedia is just really exciting. And I think that for me, comics is the most exciting branch of that kind of storytelling. But I'm sure that, not every reader is going to agree with that.
Well, they may be wrong, But yeah, I really want to thank you for your time. I think it has been fantastic talking about this comic. I do think it makes a difference. But for anyone interested in it, there are thousands of comics online that try to explore the media in different ways, what the guys at The Believer have done. You can go to Scott McCloud's site, of course. You can go to Jason Leck's comics. You can look at Rewind's site. So many more. Ida Eva Netherdahl. So many names that have done beautiful things digitally. But my favorite is this one. I want to
Thank you.
But thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It's fantastic what you guys have done. And have a beautiful day, and please create more beautiful comics.
We will. We'll keep doing it. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Thank you so much.